So now that we have our player moving around using the WSAD key and the arrow keys, let's go ahead and create restraints for our player. For example, I don't want my player to go above 0 on the Y or below negative 4.2 on the Y. Likewise, I want it to be that when I go all the way to the right of the screen, I appear on the left and vice versa. I should be able to wrap. So what we're going to be introducing in this video is the concept of if-then logic using if statements. All right, if statements are a crucial part of the fundamental C# programming language. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of using if statements, and then we'll look at what's called pseudocode to write out our ideas in English and convert those to code. So open up your script, and let's go ahead and cover some if statements real quick. So as of right now, let's go ahead and create an example where we have a number and we want to check if that number is greater than or equal to some other value. So for instance, let's go and just create a simple program that's going to check if your age is, let's go ahead and create a program that says if you're eligible to drive a car or not. So I live in the state of Georgia, the driving age is 16. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a variable called age, and that's going to be whatever our current age is. And we're going to go ahead and create another variable called driving age. And we'll set that to whatever the requirement is for your state or country, wherever you live. So for me, it's 16. And what we're going to do here is I want to print out a message that says if I'm eligible to drive. So for age, I'll go ahead and put in 24. Driving age is 16. I want to print out a message that says yes, you can drive, or no, you can't drive. So to do that, we do the syntax for an if statement, which is the if keyword, followed by open close parenthesis and curly braces. Inside this parenthesis here is where your condition goes. So here, the condition is if age is greater than driving age. So if 24 is greater than driving age, that's a true condition. That means anything within the curly braces here will get ran. So for instance, I can go ahead and say debug.log, and we're going to go ahead and say you can drive. So let's go ahead and run that. And you can see here, it says you can drive. All right, great. So now we know that I can drive. But what if you can't? What if your age was, say, 15? And we go ahead and run this. Is anything going to print out? And the answer is no. And the reason for that is because we're only checking for a condition if age is greater than driving age. So now we can have a default. And that default could use basically like a printout saying, no, you can't drive. And to do that, we use what's called an else statement. We use the else keyword followed by brackets. So if this condition is true, then what's in the curly braces will get ran. Otherwise, it's going to default on the else. And we can go ahead and say debug.log. And we'll go ahead and say, you cannot drive. And if we run that and we have an age of 15, obviously it's a false condition. 15 is not greater than 16. So it results in the else statement getting called. And you can see here it says you cannot drive. Now there's one more thing we can check. What if maybe we got an invalid input? What if we want to have an age that says, if your age is greater than driving age, or your age is less than driving age, or if your age is exactly the driving age. Then we get into what's called an else if statement. And the else if allows us to continue on in the if statement to where if the first if fails, check the second. And if that one fails, result in using the default else. So for that, we can say else if, and we'll go ahead and say here, else if age is less than driving age. And we'll go ahead and print out debug.log. We'll go ahead and say, you can't drive. And then down here, we'll go ahead and have a default case. So what happens if your age is greater than driving age? It's going to print out you can drive. If your age is less than the driving age, you can't drive. Else, your age must be the driving age. We're going to go ahead and say debug.log. You must be 16. So if we go ahead and save this, I'm going to set my age to 16. We'll now demonstrate that our program is going to default on the else because none of the other conditions were true. And you'll see here it says you must be 16. So we'll be using if statements all throughout, and you'll be using them throughout your entire game development career if that's where you choose to go. It's one of the most crucial fundamental elements of C# and any programming language when you're making games. So if statements help us create game logic. So what we want to do right now is we want to create a program that's going to limit our player from going above 0 on the y-axis. So what I recommend doing is writing out pseudocode for what you're trying to do, and then we can think about the problem and convert that pseudocode to real C# code. So for instance, pseudocode is just a simple comment, and we go ahead and say if player on the y is greater than 0, then what do we want to do? So if player on the y is greater than 0, we need to set player position to 0. And as you can see here, we wrote this out in plain English, and we can now easily convert this. So here we're going to create an if statement, and we're going to say if player on the y is greater than 0. How can I get the y position of the player? Well, it's part of the transform, and it's part of the position, and I want the y. If the transform.position.y is greater than 0, then what do I want to do? I want to get the current position, and I want to assign it basically to 0, right? So we're going to go ahead and say new vector 3, and we'll place in 0, 0, 0. Let's go ahead and test this and see what happens. Let that compile, go ahead and run it. You'll see now that we can't go above the x, or I'm sorry, we can't go above the y. If we click on the player, our position is at 0, 0, 0. I can move down, I can move left and right, but what happens if I'm all the way over here and I go all the way up? Why does it snap back to the center? It works fine over here, I can move around just fine, but as soon as I go up to 0, it sets my x to 0 as well. Well, if we look at our code, we're telling it to do exactly that. We're resetting the x value and the y and the z all to 0. What I really want to do is set the player position on the y to 0. So to do that, that means our x needs to be the same value of x that it currently is. So to get that, we just say transform.position.x. We want to use whatever current value is assigned to the player at that given time. We just want to change the y back to 0, and we can keep the z back to 0. If we save that, you'll see that everything works really, really well. So how would we go about restraining it on the bottom? Well, because we're using an if statement checking for one condition, and we're going to use the exact same if statement checking for this condition if it's less than negative 4.2, we can go ahead and use an else if statement. So for example, we can go up down here, we can say if transform.position.y is greater than 0, else if transform.position.y is less than negative 4.2, and make sure you use an f because it's a decimal value, it's a float value. So here we're checking for else if transform.position.y is less than 4.2f, then what do we want to do? The y position now needs to be set to negative 4.2f. So once again, we'll say transform.position, we get the current position and assign it a new position. And we're going to say new vector 3, we're going to keep our x value the same, we're not going to modify the x. So transform.position.x, and the y value is going to be negative 4.2f, and 0 for z. Let's go ahead and save that. Let it compile. Let's go ahead and test it out. And as you can see here, I can't go above 0 on the x, or I'm sorry, 0 on the y, and I can't go below negative 4.2 on the y as well. So right now we've constrained our player. So as a challenge for you guys, what I want you to do is you have two options here. Go ahead and restrain it on the x-axis, so I can't go past 8.15 on the x and negative 8.15 on the x. Or go ahead and make it so that when I go off the screen, which would be about 9.4 on the x, that I appear all the way on the left, and that I also would appear on the right if I'm going to the negative 9.4. So if it's less than negative 9.4, then I move to the right side. So we're creating sort of a wrapping feature. Whichever one you decide to go with will not affect the rest of the game, so go ahead and make it yours, make it unique, and see you in the challenge review.